black and white photography. And I don't know if you're going to be able to show some of the stuff in the room here, David, but he's got pictures all along the windowsill, all the way around.
I have about half of it on.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay. Perfect. And he's got an old camera in the back, so maybe we'll get that. Anyhow, we're looking forward to having David come up here and speak. David,
That's fine.
all right.
Whacked on mute here.
Nope,
No, okay.
it's
Good.
from those.
From
Yep.
from those things.
Yep.
I'm going to be looking at 2 computer screens to do this because mine shows me what's coming up next, and the other one is looking out at you guys on Zoom. There are pictures all the way around. If you've been to the room at all, you know the windows on 2 sides, and all of the windows have they're filled around, leaving with black and white prints leaning around.
One colored.
There's a correction from Alice. Who probably won't be the first or the only time. There is one color picture there, which you'll get to see on screen a little bit later. This is kind of a combination photography and a bit of classification type talk too, because I was asked about how I got interested in photography. I'm not sure quite how. I grew up with a father who was blind, so we didn't do a whole lot of visually oriented things. Hardly ever went to movies when I was a kid. But when I was in graduate school, I was working at a church on the south side of Chicago with partly with youth ministry there. And one of the former members of the youth ministry had gone off to college and started doing photography freelance for the Sun-Times and the Chicago Tribune and newspapers and that. And she gave me a camera. That was the first camera that I had when I was in my early 20s. I started taking some pictures and got hooked on it. And when I got through school and had a job and a little bit more money, I bought a camera and some equipment and started doing some darkroom work in the pantry of the first house that I bought. I was by myself. I wasn't doing a whole lot of cooking and I didn't have a lot to put in the pantry. So I put a darkroom in there. But as life goes on, things change. The young woman that gave me the camera went on to work for some people in Chicago. She was the first Black mayor's official photographer. She went to work for the Charlotte Observer and then was recruited to work for the New York Times as a photojournalist. And she's been there over 30 years and won a bunch of awards, including being on teams that have gotten Pulitzer Prizes. So who knew where she was headed? She was good. She still is. She's a very good photographer. But she's the one that got me started by giving me this little camera. I kind of learned by hit or miss things and was progressing along somewhat. And then we ended up getting married and having kids, and that kind of got in the way of photography for a long time. So that stuff was packed away, and every time we moved, these boxes moved along with us until about 15 years ago, I decided to try to get back into things. And I'd said something to one of the members of my church, who at the time was the head of photography for the Maine State Police Forensics Lab. And he had lots of cameras around, and we were going to take a trip to Yellowstone, and he came in and put a camera on my desk, and he said, well, take this along and see how it works for you. So that got me started again taking photography. And there are 2 pictures in the room that I took on that trip about 15 years ago to Yellowstone. One's in the front and the back, but they are not on the other pictures that I have. I'm sorry, I had trouble getting a copy of them because they're under glass and not easy to take out of the frame. But they're 2 waterfall pictures. But let's get into some of the photography related stuff. You should be seeing a picture of the Capitol. I took that from the balcony here last week, and I decided that we start with some basics. There are 3 kinds of lenses for most cameras. Well, there are 4. A lot of cameras now have zoom lenses, but if you don't have zoom lenses, there are wide angle, normal, and telephoto lenses. This is a view from the balcony here, looking at the Capitol with what's called a normal length lens, which in the older cameras, that's pretty much what they all came with. The next slide. And then the next slide that we have shows you what a wide angle lens does. So you see more of a wider view, but it's harder to see details of the Capitol in the next slide. And that's a telephoto. And that zooms, gets you in close. And if you want to see the statue on top, you need a telephoto lens. The next slide. There. So that if you really wanted details of that, you would need a longer lens to do that. I'm looking, my computer doesn't want to give me all what I need. I'm just gonna have to go without that. What do we have next? No. See, my notes are the pictures here. So you think about what lens to use for a picture if you're having an interchangeable lens. Is if you have just a zoom lens, you can, there's a wide angle to a more telephoto, and depending what kind of zoom lens, it'd be how far, how wide or how close you could get to things. There's also a difference between color and black and white photography. This is a mobile, I think this is in the museum here. The Chazen Museum. I couldn't think of the name of it. But if you do the next slide, you'll see in black and white, that doesn't work very well because it depends on the colors. Can we go back again to the color? You see how the red stands out from the rest are all gray tones. It's not a great picture, but it illustrates the difference between color and black and white. So there are times when color has an advantage. Go to the next one. This is another time where color has an advantage. This is out our back window a couple weeks ago. And you see what it looks like in black and white. It's just kind of dull. Now there can be great sky pictures in black and white, but not this one because the color needs to be there. If you have the shape in the clouds that has an interest itself in the forms and maybe abstract without being dependent on color, then it can make a very good picture. But you need something to take the place of what the color does. Next thing to think about is how you set the aperture on the lens is a knob that you can turn, or you turn on the lens, and they're usually from 2 or 2.8 or 4 up to 16 or 22. If you look at this picture, again, this is out our back window, you'll see that the background, the houses there are in focus, and it's kind of a distraction. We go to the next picture. The next one, that you see the houses are kind of blurred, and your eye goes more to the center of the picture, the leaded glass piece. So if you want to call attention to something, you want to try to have that in focus and have what you don't want to send, the distractions in the picture, try to have them out of focus. And the easiest way to do that is to have your lens open as wide as you can. The lower numbers, the 2 or 2.8 or 4. And if you do that, the depth, another technical term, depth of focus, a camera lens will be in apparent focus for a certain space. So if you're wide open, it's a very narrow depth of focus. But if you stop the lens down, being the smaller aperture in the lens, then the depth of focus gets bigger and bigger. So if you want to have selective focus where just one thing is in focus and everything else is out of focus, then you need to have a wider lens aperture. This is part of the tips that Dan promised that you would have. So this is, now we're getting into mostly the black and white part of things and the pictures. This is a bird that you can see the background is somewhat out of focus. Not extreme, but and the boards that are underneath the bird are in pretty sharp focus. So there's a definite kind of depth to the picture that gives, having what you're close to and the main interest is in focus, but the background that needs to be there, but it's not your primary interest, that's out of focus. So that's using the selective focus to highlight a certain part of the picture. Next. This is an example of idea that didn't work. I like to take water pictures, and I saw the water on these rocks, was intrigued by the movement of it, and took several different exposures, and I just wasn't happy with any of them. It's kind of a so-so picture. But ideas have a way of germinating. And another time, another place, several years later, I was out with a digital camera and came up with that picture. That one is here behind Kara.
Cool.
That's one color.
So
You can see it so much better over here.
If you have an idea about a picture and don't feel like it's worked out, don't give up on it. Keep trying to do something with the idea. Try variations, and this one happened to work out. Next. This is another picture that is not quite there yet. This was from northern New Mexico a couple years ago. Was there with some friends, and there was this great fungus on an old tree that had fallen down. The fungus was about, it may have been a foot wide. It was pretty good size. And I've tried to get prints of that, but it's been hard. That in this one, the fungus looks pretty good. That's about the tonality that I want for the fungus. But the leaf that is there on the upper left is just, it's all white. You can't tell what's going on. There's no detail in it. So I tried to get some detail in the leaf by printing the whole thing darker. And now you can see that there's detail a little bit in the leaf, but the fungus is getting pretty dark. And then I did another one that was even more extreme. And that's where I stopped. This was shortly before we moved, and I had to break down my dark room to move, and I don't quite have it together yet. Hopefully by the end of the year I will. Let's go on to the next one. This is, you recognize Hostas, but this is one that was in our yard after the first frost hit. And it was still green in the center, but it was turning yellow around the edges. But without the colors, you just see the gray and the white. And that caught my eye. That one is here somewhere too. You can see them in person. Go ahead. This was the first picture that I did with a 4x5 camera. I had negatives that are 4 inches by 5 inches. And that's what's in the back quarter of the room. And those of you who are here, if you want to see what it looks like to look through a camera like that, you can put the cloth over your head, because you have to be in darkness to be able to see the glass that's there. You'll be able to see the Capitol, and you'll notice that it's upside down.
Right.
So if you want to turn things around in politics, and take a look at it.
Look through a box
yeah.
camera. Isn't that what Ansel Adams took most of his picture?
Yeah, he did not a box camera, but one similar to what's sitting in the back there.
Yep.
Yeah. So one of the ways of showing movement and passage of time in photography is to have things that are decayed. So there's this attraction to things like the old stone. Another kind of movement is water. So this is a waterfalls in Nova Scotia. We visited some years ago. And then there's another waterfall from, that's from Maine, not too far from where we used to live. That's Moxie Falls. The Moxie area is where the soda Moxie comes from, which
Oh.
Midwesterners probably don't know about. It's a very limited regional delicacy. Next one.
Stephen King and
Stephen
books,
King
he
talks about, that's right, he does. Now this is a little stream near us. So it's moving water, but it's also frozen water in the form of snow, which is easy to photograph in a way if you know how to meter it. Your camera is going to want to try to make snow look gray instead of white. So you have to counteract that effect, because when a camera meter looks out at a scene, it wants to make everything a kind of average middle gray. And whether it's a digital or a film camera, the meters all want to make it look 18% gray. And if you have a lot of snow or sand at the beach and you're setting your aperture manually, where you need to override the automatic exposure to give it more light, because if you don't do that, the picture is going to look dark and it won't look so much like what you remember. So let's go to the next one. Now this combines the dying plants and the snow. Go to the next one. And any guesses of what this is?
It's a river and it's frozen. Water running underneath.
Yeah, it's a little stream that was frozen on the ice is above the water a little bit.
Okay.
You'll see the water is blurred. I used a slow shutter speed so that it would look blurred, but the ice is sharp. There's kind of an abstract image, and then there's another one shot from pretty much the same place. And then I think both of them are around the walls here. Go ahead to the next one. And this is that same little stream where the ice was, only this was in the fall. No. So and get into taking pictures of rocks and things like that. Partly, it's a technical exercise to see if you can get the shades of gray and light and dark, to see if you can take something that's abstract, just lines. You have no color to save it.
Right.
So there's light and dark, white, black, and gray in here, but there's also different textures within the stones and different distances. So what's at the top is a little farther away than the middle. And this illustrates a principle of composition that some people use. It's good as guidelines, but doesn't have to be followed strictly. It's called the rule of thirds. If you divide a picture into 3 sections, and I see Tara nodding.
I was going to ask if you do that in this type of photography.
Yeah, you use that as the same thing in graphics, I imagine.
Yeah.
So the top above the lightest line going across, where it kind of recedes from you, is approximately a third. The middle is what comes out at you most. But if you look at the bottom of the picture, there's a third there too. And you can also do thirds across, drawing lines vertically, not just horizontally. That doesn't really mean anything for this one.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes the intersection of those horizontal and vertical lines is the best place to place something, to get some a sense of motion and dynamism in what's a static still picture. Here's another kind of challenge. Now I'm gonna let Sean tell me what that is.
That's the bathtub when you're a college student, you never clean it for 5 years. No, no.
It's kind of a Rorschach test.
It's got some steel to it.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
This is a close-up of the flat side of some rocks.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And it looks like it could almost be an aerial view over the Midwest.
Yes.
Oh, from
True, like a
Plane.
farm.
From a place, yeah.
an old dry riverbed.
farmland and stuff, yeah.
Dry riverbed.
Or a highway going through.
Plus,
Go ahead. This is from northern New Mexico, between Albuquerque and Santa Fe on one of the reservations, an area called Tent Rocks that has some section that's a slot canyon. And
well,
the point of this isn't to look at the rocks, it's an abstract image. And I think it looks much better in an actual print than what I can see on the screen. But I'm having trouble because I'm looking partly at the window as I face the screen too.
I'm blinded.
But there's a lot there going on in a picture like this. Different distances from the camera, different textures, different tonal qualities, a little bit of sky peeking through, but not a whole lot. Yeah. Cool. That's an obvious one for a preacher to take. Sometimes you just find things that you've got to take a picture of. And I pair that with another birch tree that has the bark off a round circle, and it's obviously a dying dead tree. And that both of those are somewhere along the wall here on the back behind Kathy.
So, yeah.
Another rock, this one is also in New Mexico. There is a Presbyterian retreat center called Ghost Ranch. And this is one of the most prominent rock formations at Ghost Ranch. The foot of this formation, you can't really see it, but if you were looking, you can tell you're looking down, you're hot up in the air. If you look down and to the left, would be where Georgia O'Keeffe's summer house is.
Cool.
So this is right above her house, and it's one of those challenges you got to hike up and then get the right place and try to make a picture. I was there for a workshop a year or two after I started getting back into photography, and we had to do some assigned projects and particular things. And I realized that as I was taking pictures, I was starting to do almost a visual theology. And I can share more about that another time, not for today. But I kept thinking about, there are various verses in the Psalms that say things that, in effect, God is a rock. So this rock became an anchor point for me.
It looks like a face.
Does look like a face.
Sort of.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Oh.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go to the next. Now, if you think of that rock as representing God, and you see it off in the distance under the tree branch on the left.
Oh, wow. Is that the same rock?
That's the same rock.
Really?
That's the
Oh,
same
I saw.
rock.
Oh, cool.
And this is an image, the kind of image that's very common in some of Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings from New Mexico with the weathered skull. That's hanging on that's actually on the porch of one of the buildings at Ghost Ranch. No,
Wow.
hanging next to a light fixture. Right. And then we go from New Mexico to Maine. This is one of the iconic lighthouses in Maine, Pemaquid Point, and particular rock formation that lots of people come to take pictures of, because the lines in the rocks lead your eye up to the lighthouse. And if you notice it, a lot of people don't notice, but there's this little pool of water that's there most of the time that on a clear day will be reflecting the lighthouse if you get into the right position. So
Cool.
that's another lighthouse, this time in Nova Scotia. The lighthouse is in the fog. And it's a challenge in photography to have fog in an image and be able to make an effective use of it and not just have a kind of blurry, washed out picture. So the lighthouse gives you the effect of the fog, but the boulders that are closer at the bottom are sharp and clear in focus because they're close. The next one is another shot from the lighthouse looking out over some of the cove. It's a place called Peggy's Cove just south of Halifax, Nova Scotia. Yeah. And that's a sculpture garden outside of Copenhagen, Denmark. This is another town.
That's not a sculpture.
Henry Moore?
Sorry.
I don't remember. Alice thinks it may be a Henry Moore sculpture.
It's like
Which another rock to take a picture of to a photographer.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't do very many pictures of people, but that's one that was kind of fun.
That was funny.
And one more. One more.
Little milkweed.
Sean knows this one. Milkweed.
I thought
that
it was
was
a
the big bag
dandelion
of
when I
fruit.
saw the files. I was like, oh, is that like a dandelion blowing up?
On the left side.
Several
The
little
seeds
mice.
in it.
You can see lots of things in a picture like this. That's part of what makes it fun for me to do images that are not always recognizable right away. So this is the kind of thing that I like to do.
Now, how did you get the background totally black?
I didn't light it. And I
Oh,
put
you just had it.
and I put a black background.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that was
That's what I thought.
that was taken. I
Pretty cool.
snipped off the top of a milkweed and I stuck it in a vase or something and had a black cloth behind it. And
It's cool.
the lighting was from either side.
Oh,
So that it didn't go, the background was black felt that doesn't reflect.
What you got?
So, yeah, and
cool.
6 by 9s?
and if you do your exposure right, even if it looks a little bit gray, you can make it look like it's black. And you have some control over printing too. So that's a sample of what I've done over the last few years and what I hope to get back to doing. For those that are in the room, there are, I think all of these are somewhere around the room, plus some others that I brought in. And I also brought a 4x5 view camera that if anybody wants to take a look through it, you can. But you have to put the dark cloth over your head to block out the light because you're not going to be able to see the screen if there's extraneous lighting coming in.
So that's the type of camera that you shoot with?
Uh,
Or is
Oh.
that's just like a artifact?
no, that's a working camera.
Okay.
That last picture that was up, I took with that camera.
Okay.
So it's not real old. A couple people wondered how old it was. It's like I bought it used, but I think it's probably less than 25 or 30 years.
Oh, really?
Old at most, yeah. It's a pretty new camera. You can buy them brand new.
Cool.
They're not cheap because it's a lot of work to put them together. But that's a wooden field camera that is very light to carry. I have it in a big backpack, but Alice picked it up when we were bringing things in and she'd forgotten how light it is.
And I must tell you that when he uses this camera, I have a book with me. And I find a log or a rock and I read my book because it takes him forever.
Can those of you on hear what she said?
Love is patient, but love is kind.
They should be.
They should.
Yeah, because there's
Yeah.
microphones, yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Are there questions? Kathy?
how did you get interested in black and white photography, and what kind of camera are you using now? Are you using film? Are you doing black and white, or are you doing color and transferring it to black and white?
I did black and white film first because when I started, there was no digital. Commercially, it wasn't available. And I'm a tightwad at heart. Black and white film was the cheapest film to buy, and it didn't cost a whole lot to get some equipment to develop it rather than paying somebody else to do it. And as I gradually got into things more, I wanted to do the developing myself so that I had control over how that was done. Differences in temperature and developing time and what chemicals you use to develop the film are a factor in how the negatives look and in how the final prints come out. So that I started because I was a tightwad and then got hooked into the control that you have, and that's an advantage and a disadvantage of a feature and a bug. But I like being able to have the control even when it doesn't work out quite the way I think. Matt, you asked other
So do you
things.
still use black film? Are you
What I-
still doing film?
Yeah, since I haven't had my darkroom operating, I have 25 or 30 rolls of film that I've shot in the last couple of years that I need to develop, but I've kind of stopped because it was getting that backlog. And it just we moved just over 2 years ago and into a new house and had a lot of things to do in addition to trying to get a darkroom together in the basement, which meant basically finishing off a room and getting plumbing to it. So I'm seeing the, can I say the light at the end of the tunnel for a dark room? We don't want to see light. I was going to show you a picture of my dark room, but I forgot to put it in. It was just going to be a black slide. This is a
We
dark.
can picture that.
And as far as what I shoot, I do some digital now, mostly for snapshots, not so much for like working on a tripod. But depending on where I am and what kind of pictures there are, I really like to use the 4x5 because it has the large negative, 4x5 inches. The next size down is 120 roll film, which is 9 centimeters. What's that translate to? 2.5 inches, maybe?
2.25.
2.25, yeah, it's 2.25 because one camera is 2.25 by 2.25 is 6x6. I have several that's called medium format. Then the negatives are about that high, and they vary. They can be square. They can be a little longer. They can be up to 6x9 is the size that's right below 4x5. So there's a big difference between the smaller and the larger of the medium formats. But there's also a big jump when you go from 35 millimeter, which is what people, everybody that had a film camera years ago, well, if it wasn't a Brownie box camera kind of thing, it was probably a 35 millimeter from like the 60s on. And the negatives are only about an inch by an inch and a quarter in size. And the bigger negative you have, the higher quality print you can get. I mean, you can get 8x10 prints from a 35 millimeter negative very easily. But if you want to go more than that, they start to deteriorate. And a 16x20 print, I don't have one quite that big here. The biggest I have is 11x14, but the next size up would be a 16x20 print, is not that big an enlargement from 4x5. That's all, four by, it's about a 4-time enlargement. And a 4-time enlargement with a 35 millimeter would be about a 6x8 print. So an 8x10 print from a 35 millimeter is enlarged more than a 16x20 print from a 4x5 negative. And you get a different quality in the gray tones with the larger format if you have good prints. So I'm using a variety of cameras now, Kathy, depending if I have time to set up on a tripod with a view camera, because there are a lot of movements in that, and that can control how a picture looks. And unless somebody's interested, I won't go into what all is involved there, but that's why Alice takes a book along and finds a place to sit while it might take me half an hour to an hour just to set up for one picture. So I was leery about doing that for a while because I didn't have a lot of confidence. And was this shot worth spending an hour on getting it set up, or is it just walk by and take a quick click with something? But I've gotten much more deliberative and more thinking about what I do with pictures. And part of that was when I did that first workshop at Ghost Ranch a little over 10 years ago. The instructor had us doing everything with, no matter what camera you had, he wanted you to put it on a tripod. And I got in the habit of using a tripod there, and I've continued that ever since. Not always, but if I'm going out and really I'm going out to shoot pictures, I'm carrying a tripod to put the camera on. Because it'll move when I push the shutter button.
Yep.
Other questions? Oh, thank you.
So cool.
That's cool stuff.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dave. We make our donation to the Untitled now in honor of you as well as all speakers that we have. So we will do that. Thank you for sharing this really awesome gift and talent with us. Next week, Dan, we've got elections and
Elizabeth, if she can get on, if she tried to get on, she wasn't get on today just to test it. So I'm not sure if it is, but if not, Lynn's our backup. So we have a program for sure next week. So
great, great, thank you. So we'll see you guys all next week. Have a great week. Thank you.
Thanks. Excellent. Here.